Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Impact of COVID-19 in the Energy Sector in Latin America. We are grateful to Dr. Isaac Dyner and our distinguished panelists today for today's timely discussion. We're also grateful to the Latin American Association for Energy Economics of IAEE for co-hosting this webinar with us. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address your questions. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Isaac Dyner, Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences and Engineering at the University of Jorge Tadeo Lozano in Bogota, Colombia, who will lead this webinar. Isaac, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks to the IAEE. Let me share my screen first. Welcome to this webinar. We'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the Latin American energy sector. And first, we would like to thank IAEE and ALADE for having us this morning. The agenda for this meeting today, that would last for about an hour or so. I've been announced that we can go further than that, but it depends on the audience. First, I would shortly present our speakers, and then I would conduct a brief introduction to COVID-19, the short and long-term effects on the Latin American energy, giving a background of what it is been like in the rest of the world. And then I will turn it over to our invited guests, and they will conduct short presentations, and then we would move to question and answers according to what the audience would like to hear from us. First, the speakers this morning, the panelists would be, as you can check further, more larger CV or bio of each one of them. The first one is Edmar Almeida. He's a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. His research focuses on the evolution of oil, gas, and electricity industries in Brazil and globally. Then we have Luciano Losekann. He's a professor at Fluminense Federal University. His research includes regulation and organization of the Brazilian electricity market, oil, and the economics of in Brazil, focusing also on the demand forecast on transport. Then we have Gonzalo Casaravilla. He's from Uruguay, professor at the Department of Energy at the Universidad de la República de Uruguay. His research is on optimal planning and operations of electricity systems. And I'm the moderator of this webinar. Just a brief introduction on the COVID-19 and its effect on on energy. Um, First, and you probably heard before on these webinars here at IAEE, demand has dropped everywhere. And demand has dropped not only broadly, but in terms of different sources of energy. Coal, gas, oil have shown drops between 4 to 6%, and nuclear have come down about 2%. The only energy source that has increased a bit is renewables by about 1% or a bit less. In terms of countries and daily drops, we've been exposed to drops by up to 30% in many countries, but the most common drop was about 20 to 25% on daily basis. And that has meant that prices have come down. Just to give you an example, demand reduction in Europe came down by about 15%, and prices were around 30 to 40 euros per megawatt, which is about 5 to 6 cents per dollar for kilowatts. But these drops in electricity prices has not been taking place everywhere. If we move to Latin America, and I would shortly mention Latin America, but the rest of panelists will talk about different countries, Uruguay and Brazil, particularly. Colombian electricity demand on monthly basis have come down the lowest by about 11%, almost 12% in April. And but prices have gone up in May, a very high level. Instead of 4 or 5 or 6 cents per dollar per kilowatt, we show about 15 to 20 cents per kilowatt during some days in May. And this was due to that, given that reservoir levels were lowest at historical levels during this month. And that's because 70% of our electricity comes from hydro bases. And but in the mid-term, that's the short term. The short term has, as I mentioned, hasn't been good in terms of prices. The margin hasn't been all that large, and that's why prices were all that high. And recovering when we mentioned the mid and long-term effects of COVID, recovery shows a bit slower than the industry, than what happens in the industrialized world. New projects are already being delayed because of COVID as well. General structural problems are part of this, but related to COVID as well, because people cannot move around and do their job. Penetration of renewables will slow down a bit. We don't know how much, and this is an uncertainty, but Colombia needs to be careful about resource adequacy, as is happening in California. Next, let's turn it over to our guest speakers to tell us about the Latin American cases of the effect of COVID, and they will refer to the short-term effects of on demand and prices, and the recovery. What will this be like? Will COVID-19 affect the energy transition? And what can be expected for renewables in the mid to long term? So perhaps, if you agree, the order would be first, Gonzalo Casaravilla will talk to us about especially the Uruguay case, and then Luciano and Edmar will tell us about the Brazilian case. Gonzalo, please.
Okay. I'm sharing presentation. Okay. Okay, thank you, Isaac. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm going to start. Dear friends, first of all, we want to thank the organization for the opportunity to present how Uruguay has been affected by COVID and what we are doing about it in the electricity sector. Some problems here, okay. Uruguay is a small country located between two big countries, Brazil and Argentina. And in electricity sectors, Brazil is 40 times bigger than Uruguay, and Argentina is 8 times bigger than Uruguay. Have in mind that the maximum demand in Uruguay is 2,000 megawatts. The interconnection with Brazil is 600 megawatts by frequency converters, and the interconnection with Argentina is 2,000 megawatts by an international dam. So we are very good interconnected. We have already been done all investments for a very good energy exchange. This is something that I want to remark. In 2019, as in the previous 3 or 4 years, 98% of the electricity was renewable energies, and almost 40% was by non-conventional ones. We are not worried about the future energy generation matrix. It's going to be more of the same that we already have. The last years, exports from Uruguay have been around 20% to our neighbors. Regarding the electricity use, 28% corresponds to commerce and service, which is similar than the world's average. Then industrial sector is 22%, which is lower than the world average. Residential sector is 42%, which is higher than the world's average. And perhaps a differential condition of Uruguay is that almost all the residential sanitary water is heated by electricity. I'm going to talk about 3 topics. Let's start by seeing how COVID has affected Uruguay's electricity demand. Let's start with some history. In 2014, it was planned that the electricity demand would reach 15,000 gigawatt hours by these dates. The reality was very different. At the beginning of 2020, we had a certain forecast, but with the COVID, the picture changed again. Please see the red curve. The current demand is 30% lower respect to those forecasts of a few years ago. In your talk, something we say that the one that commands is the demand. Let's see what happens this year. Last year, we planned to growth of 2.7% in 2020 in comparison to 2019. So the initial expected demand is shown in the green curve. Before COVID, for example, in January, the forecast was corrected due to macroeconomic situation. Finally, the black curve is the corrected expected demand before COVID landed. So it's the base. Then in March, COVID landed. And the demand falls sharply and for a few months. We wonder what happens in July. Something is changed in the picture. The answer has multiple and combined causes. First, July is the coldest month of the year, and in 2020, it was colder than the historical average. Second, due to COVID, we have certain level of confinement. Many people work from home, do not attend shows, children go to school much less, etc. So, as in the rest of the world, the demand of cones grew up. This was important in Uruguay. Remember that in Uruguay, the residential demand is 42% of the demand. It's a differential factor, I think. So, corrected the real demand by the weather factor, we have the corrected real demand. So this is the base. We need to compare with that value. The black car is the current corrected forecast, and the red car is the corrected real demand. So we compare things that are comparable. As we see, due to COVID, the demand had, in average, an initial fall of 8%. It's similar to the numbers that showed Isaac. Actually, the demand is recovering. It is expected to close this year with an average annual reduction due to COVID between 2 or 3% of the demand in comparison with 2019. Now, nobody knows, but this is the best forecast that I can make. But the picture changes if we see what happens to each sector. The picture shows that the real monthly and expected energy billing of sectors. It is confirmed that residential sector increased its demand more than it was expected. At the same time, commerce, services, and industry demand was drastically affected. Really, the picture shows each level of demand, and it's very clear that one grow up and the others fall really in a drastically behavior. Particularly, the average of 8%, just already talked, is transformed into reduction in the order of 18% for critical sectors. This reduction has been recovering as the activity in the country are gradually authorized by the government. We wonder if Uruguay has a typical recovery. The second topic we want to show is a model of infrequent severe crisis events such as COVID. We begin to work with that because we find that the COVID event is possible to model it. So we model and we incorporate it into the investment planning and optimal dispatch tool that we use in Uruguay called SIMSE. Basically, we characterize the event as a stochastic phenomenon, which has a probability of arrive every 10 years. When the crisis arrives, it causes a sharply fall of the prices of oil and the demand, both at the same time. Then, and by a recursive filter, year after year, the recovery is 30%, as it is shown in the picture on the left. In the model, in the case of oil, the maximum fall is 70%. And in the case of demand, the maximum fall is 10%. The picture at the right shows the demand, how demand is affected by the couple of crisis events. As conclusion, on the one hand, the inclusion of the crisis model affected very little the planning and the system. It is not shown in this picture. But on the other hand, it is not the same for the marginal generators. For example, and this picture shows that for wind generators that doesn't have in mind a crisis event, it will have an income reduction for the last megawatt installed. For example, expect a reduction of 25% and with a probability of 5%, a reduction of up to 50%. So the conclusion is marginalist markets for wind and sun are very sensitive to system imbalances. At last, the third topic that we want to show is the potential regional energy exchange in the current situation. So the scope change, we have more energy in our countries and the opportunities are there. Let's think a very simple export scheme. The exchange price is billed as Uruguay's export marginal cost plus the income from the export tool. It's clear. Then the profit of Uruguay is evaluated by comparing the non-export and the export scenario. Later, the profit of Argentina and Brazil is because they use energy of cheaper import than the local option. Note that the marginal cost of Argentina and Brazil do not change due to the little energy that Uruguay exports compared to these bigger markets that we have in our neighbors. Simulated hour by hour from 2021 to 2024, the red line is the demand of Uruguay. It's not very clear, the red color, but the red line is the demand of Uruguay. And the energy from above are exports. The result accumulated in the 4 years will be, on the one hand, Uruguay's income will be $500 million, but had most expensive costs respect to the base case. So Uruguay's profit will be in the order of $300 million. On the other hand, the profit of Argentina and Brazil will be in the order of $200 million. Therefore, the final result added together will be almost $500 million. Everything and only what should happen is that hour by hour, the operators and agents are enabled to exchange energy based on clear market rules and trust between them. Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina, not without problems, have shown that this is possible. It is management and will. Management and will. All depends on the people management and the will that they have. Conclusion. We can say, at first, COVID caused a sharply fall of the demand in commerce, service, and industry, and they are slowly recovering. Then residential demand increases due to confinement and teleworking. We show that COVID is a crisis event that can be modeled. Therefore, it was not a black swan. In that point, because of crisis events, the general planning do not change substantially, but the risk figure of generators exposed to marginal markets is affected. Regional demand reduction can be an opportunity to increase the regional energy exchange. Because of COVID, the poverty of the people will increase. It is everyone's responsibility not to destroy potential richness. It is no need to make new investments. We just have to act rationally and build trust. Just only rationally and trust. This is my last message. Thank you very much. And I remain to answer the question you may have. Thank you, Isaac. You have the word.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you very much. Interesting presentation. Now let's turn it over to Luciano. Luciano will tell us about the effect of COVID on the electricity sector in Brazil. Please, Luciano.
Thank you, Isaac. I will show my presentation. Go. Good morning. First, I would like to thank the invitation to present this webinar. The IAEE and the Latin American Association for it. As Isaac said, I will focus on the electricity sector in Brazil. The impact of COVID-19 in Brazil was very severe because Brazil was a country very impacted by COVID, the pandemic. And I will have only 4 slides to show the picture, first on demand and after on the implications of the fall on demand. So the falling demand was very severe. This graphic shows the situation for the 4 regions in Brazil, the electricity regions. So the southeast and the northeast was the main impacted region, when those 2 region was very representative of the Brazilian demand, and are also the region that was very affected by the pandemic. When you see the figures by month on the upper side of the slide, we see that the worst month for in consumption reduction was April, and May was very similar compared to 2019. It was a 12% reduction on those 2 months, and after on the electricity consumption is recovering, and nowadays the figures are very similar to what happened in 2019. So in Brazil, we had a severe fall on demand, as you see, and the recovery was slow, but nowadays we are very very similar to what happened in 2019. When you see the what happened by sector, industry and commerce was the sectors that were more impacted by the pandemic. We see in services and commerce, the reduction was around 25% in May 2020. That was the worst month for this sector. For households, the impact was not very relevant. In May 2020, there was a reduction compared to 2019, but it's in some months the household consumption is even larger than it was in 2019. So as Gonzalo has already remarked, the households segment was not very impacted. Actually, in some way, the consumption increased as people were kept at home and increased their consumption of electricity. Larger consumers that are concentrated on the free markets, that are the numbers on the table above, were more impacted than captive consumers, but they are recovering faster. Now you see that July numbers are very good. So when you see by the sector of the industry, some segments are very impacted, as car manufacturing, as COVID-19 has a huge impact on car use. Car sales has a huge impact, and the consumption of electricity was 70% lower in April than it was in 2020 than April 2019. Other sectors are very impacted as well, as textile, service, and transportation. So in those sectors, the impact are very significant. One impact on the industry was on the distribution company. As a distribution company are the less linked to consumers, they are more impacted than the other segments of the electricity production chain. So when you compare the 2020 figures to 2019, we see that impressive fall. Here the numbers are for revenue the numbers are in 2020 prices. So when we see the real impact, it was around $1.4 billion on reduction of revenue on utilities. They are very impacted not only by the demand reduction, but also by the default of consumers that cannot afford to pay the electricity bills, and some readjustments of the tariffs that are postponed. We have to keep in mind that utilities in Brazil, they have supply agreements with generators that are for long term, so that are not able to adapt their portfolio to reduce quantities. So they are because of that, they are very impacted. By the side of price, Isaac has shown the impact in Colombia. In Brazil, the system is similar to Colombia, but the impact of short-term price was significant. The price decreased from $60 per megawatt level to $15 to $20 per megawatt hour. So it decreased by 4. But we have to keep in mind that the wholesale price in Brazil, the short-term wholesale price in Brazil, is not that relevant. So, but because most of energy trade is made by long-term contracts, so the short-term is not that important. It's important for the large consumers, but certainly for the distribution company, they are not so relevant. To face this problem, first, the government kept the service for consumers. The supply cuts are not allowed during the pandemic, so even the consumers cannot afford to pay. The services are kept in the government structure, a loan to utilities for the distribution companies that around $2.9 billion in phase in order to reduce the financial impact to the utilities. It is justified to avoid the tariff increase on short term, but certainly this loan have an impact in long terms, because as they are paid, they are a 5-year loan, so actually 3 years loan. So when they are paid, the tariff should increase on the next years. So recently, the government published a provisional decree that oriented to decrease the impact on tariff on long term. There are is very comprehensive. So, but the impact on that I would like to stress are two. The first is the decrease on the R&D obligation that in Brazil utilities are obliged to spend around 1% of their revenue on R&D, and the government will use some of these resource to avoid tariff increase on the next years. And other point that is very important, that eliminated some incentive for renewable generation in Brazil. So it is meant to avoid a tariff increase on the next year when the loan will be paid, but there are some uncertainty on the other side on the impact of these measures on the sector. Those are the 4 slides I will show in the first part. So I can contribute on question and answer after on, and also thank you for your attention. That's all. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Luciano. Now we turn it over to Edmar, and now we are going to hear about oil and gas, particularly in Brazil, which is very important for everyone in Latin America.
So thank you for this invitation, first of all. It's a pleasure to be back in one of IAE seminars. I miss it. So it's a good opportunity to meet friends and discuss what's going on in energy in Latin America. So I'm going to talk about the impacts of COVID in oil and gas and biofuels markets in Brazil. I will talk about 3 subjects: what has happened in the markets, and I'm gonna start talking about some consequences for the oil and gas sector and for the biofuel sector. And I hope there is some questions afterwards so we can discuss deeply these subjects. So as well as in the electricity sector, the fuel market in Brazil has been severely affected by the COVID restrictions. We had a very important reduction in demand for the jet fuel market, which is in gray here. In May, which is the last data that we have, the jet fuel demand in Brazil was 89% lower than it was in January. So it's not just a slowdown in demand, it's a crash in the demand for jet fuel, as international flights has been reduced pretty much, and domestic flight has been reduced. We had a very important reduction on gasoline demand due to the lockdown in different parts of the country. And we have a different pattern of demand behavior for the diesel market in Brazil. The diesel market has been affected only in April and May. In June, we have already recovered a little, almost recovered the demand, and in July, the demand for diesel in Brazil is higher than in January. So this is due to the fact that people has been in the house, but the freight movement has been kept. A lot of delivery also for the commerce, and this has helped keep the demand for diesel. Another important aspect of the effect of COVID on the oil products market is that not only the demand has crashed, but also the price. As everybody knows, the price of oil has reduced by half during this first semester, and as Brazil follows the international price, so the price in Brazil in dollars of diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel has also reduced following the international market. So Petrobras, which is the dominant player in the fuel market in Brazil, has been severely affected by this crisis. Petrobras in the first quarter had to make impairments or write-off in assets of $12 billion. This impairment is due to different view from Petrobras regarding the long-term market for oil. So as the long-term price, the forecast for the price of oil and oil products in Brazil has reduced, Petrobras was forced to write off the value of part of its assets. So the company has been severely affected by this crisis. Okay, looking at the biofuels, we had two different impacts when we look at biodiesel and ethanol. In Brazil, we have a mandatory mix of 11% of biodiesel in the diesel. So all the diesel sold in Brazil must have biodiesel in the mixed. And we have the gasoline in Brazil, we have 27% of ethanol, but we also have pure ethanol market, which competes with gasoline. So even as the market for biodiesel is linked to the diesel, and the diesel market has been less affected during the COVID crisis, the biodiesel market has been suffered less, let's say. As on the other hand, ethanol market has been hit very hard by the crisis, but because the demand for ethanol has decreased, and this demand has decreased in the moment of the crop season in the most important part of ethanol production in Brazil, which is São Paulo. So the ethanol producers had a very big problem, which is they have to increase the inventories of ethanol, and at this moment, the inventories of ethanol in Brazil is 40% higher than normal, which represents a very big, important financial cost for the producers. And so a lot of ethanol producers in Brazil are facing very difficult financial situation. These companies are they are already very indebted, so that the fact that they have now financial problems or higher costs on one hand and lower price on the other hand is a very difficult moment for them. So Petrobras has been hit hard, but also the ethanol producers in Brazil. When you look at the natural gas market, we had a decrease in demand. Here I bring the information of the demand for January. So in January we had about 90 million cubic meters per day of demand, mostly supplied by the blue column here, which is the domestic production, and some in red imports from Bolivia, and some LNG imports, which is in pink here. So we had this very important decrease in demand from 90 something million cubic meters per day to something about 57 million cubic meters per day. So reduction of almost 40% in demand. And this reduction has been, the supply has been reduced to cope with this demand reduction by cutting Bolivian imports. As you see in red, the Bolivian imports has been severely affected, and this has coincided with the renegotiation of the contracts for gas imports from Bolivia. So now the contract is only for 20 million cubic per day, and it was until December for 30 million cubic per day. But also Brazilian imports of LNG has been reduced, mostly because the demand decrease is concentrated in the power generation sector. So since the demand for electricity has reduced, and the marginal generators in Brazil are oil and natural gas based thermal power plants. So the demand for thermal power plants in Brazil has reduced significantly. So as you can see, also the domestic production has been cut. This reduction is mostly on non-associated gas fields in Brazil, because as I will talk later, the production of oil in Brazil with associated gas has increased significantly this year, and due to the fact that the associated gas fields has increased their production and the demand for natural gas in Brazil has reduced, so Brazil had to increase the rate of reinjection. We are reinjecting about half of all natural gas production in Brazil. This is mostly natural gas produced in the pre-salt area, where you have a very high cost for gas, to bring gas to the shore, and you need to export oil, so you have no alternative if you don't have demand as to reinject this gas to increase oil production, and also to just to get rid of the gas, because you cannot burn the gas. So the only option, if you don't monetize the gas, is to reinject it. Okay, so just to finish this first part, I would like to say that this crisis has had an important effect on oil industry in Brazil, which is we had the COVID crisis happen when the production of oil in Brazil was increasing, and on the other hand, the demand for oil in Brazil has reduced. Since we reduced the demand for oil products, the refinery utilization in Brazil has went down from about 70% in the beginning of the year to about 55% in April, May. So we had a lot of oil in excess to export. And if you compare what happened, the Brazilian oil exports in average last year to the average of this 7th month until end of July of 2020, Brazil export has increased 30%. So whereas in other countries in the world, oil production has decreased, and also exports to cope with the decrease in the world oil demand, Brazil has increased the production and 30% in exports. So this is a huge surprise. And the main explanation for this, let's say, the huge success of Brazilian oil is the fact that the Brazilian crude from pre-salt has been a great success lately, since the International Maritime Organization has changed the regulation on the quality of bunkering oil and reducing the level of sulfur. And the Brazilian pre-salt oil is very good for producing bunkering oil and diesel fuels. So China has been buying a lot of Brazilian oil. In the right, you can see what happened month by month during this year. We had, in January, we exported about 1 million barrels per day. And in July, the last data that we have, we exported about 1.8 million barrels per day, which is 80% increase in Brazilian oil exports during this year. So Brazil is becoming a significant oil exporter country, and has been, let's say, has been a winner in this oil prices. So this has partially compensated for the crash of oil demand, oil products demand in Brazil, and it has helped very much Petrobras to rebalance its financial situation in the second half of this year. So I think I will stop here, and I look forward for questions. And you can elaborate on future impacts of this crisis on the Brazilian oil and gas and biofuel sector. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Edmar. Now we can turn to some Q&As. We've got two questions. One is for Luciano. I would think that he would be the ideal person to answer this question. Is to do with the delays in projects of transport, electricity transport, and new projects in renewables, wind renewable projects. What is it like these days during COVID, and what do you expect to happen in the near future?
Thanks, Isaac. As demand has reduced, actually I showed the figures for comparing the demand from 2020 compared to 2019. But when you compare it to the forecast of demand, the fall is even larger. It's around 6%. The numbers are similar what Gonzalo has said to Uruguay, that the real comparison is related to the forecast before the crisis. So considering that some projects will delay by the pandemics, it won't have a huge impact on the on supply and security of supply, because as demand is also decreasing, the postponing of project and infrastructure are not so relevant to those projects. Considering renewable, because the question was related to renewable, I say that some incentives were removed in Brazil. So, but if you take the whole picture, we see that the renewable in Brazil are very competitive, are very attractive. So even some incentives are removed, I think that renewable is still in condition to compete with other sources and to have a transition for a cleaner metrics in Brazil. So the metrics in Brazil is already clean, but I think that we are in a good condition to keep this movement, to keep a very large share of the renewable in the energy mix for the future. Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you, Luciano. There is a question for Edmar. It's to do with the drop in natural gas demand. And is this according to, do you think that this has to do with the environmental recovery, and that probably means that less emissions on the planet?
Yes, I think in effect we see that the emission this year has been reduced due to the COVID-19 crisis, and this is related to the less demand for fossil fuels. The question is this durable? Well, this is only related to the crisis during the pandemic. I think that we can have some lasting effects in long term for demand reduction. For example, I think that when you have a crisis in Brazil, you will lose demand in the long term. So we are postponing demand, and at the same time the renewables are being more competitive. So this crisis will in the end of the day result in the getting out of some of the fossil fuels of the market. Okay, so I think that we would have some. I'm not talking only about Brazil. I think this is valid for all the countries that has good renewable resources, either in power, electricity generation, or in biofuels. If you have good renewable resources and you lost demand, I think that when demand recover, this will be captured by renewables. So that means at the end of the day that you will miss some fossil fuel supply, and this will be good for the environment, not very good for the fossil fuel industries, coal and oil and gas.
So what are you going to do? You're going to turn into a researcher on renewables?
I am already, so has always been.
All right, good, thank you. There is a question for Gonzalo, and this to do with the trading between Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil, and the nationalistic protective wave in Virginia Parente claims.
Okay.
In these countries, how will this affect the trading between you and the rest of the countries that you connected with? And yes, that's it.
It's a good question. Thank you for the question. Yes, I'm positive. I'm really positive. I worked in that area the last 10 years. And also with the bridges blocked, we have certain problem with Argentina 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and the bridges between our countries were blocked to the people, but the energy flow in both directions. So the energy sector is more smart than the conjunctural problems, and we can interchange energy the last 40 years with Argentina and the last 10 years with Brazil. The problems are most people problems or management problems, and also commercial problems, because some agents play their role and block the integration. But I have confidence on the people, and I'm positive. Really, I don't think that this is a problem of nationalism. This is not the case in the area.
I don't have more questions, but perhaps before finishing, I'd like to ask Luciano if what it has been like in Brazil, the electricity generation. So I suppose that for what you stated earlier, everything, all wind power has been dispatched, and perhaps some water hasn't been needed, or what it's been like. You've been using all the water and all wind.
Yeah, what is happening nowadays is fuel consumption for generation is falling. As we saw in the short-term market, the PLD, and the short-term price for Brazil is the one that is related to the operation cost. So it means that fuel generation based on fossil fuel has decreased, but as wind power has priority on dispatch, it was not affected. And for hydro production, that is the main source in Brazil, make the mix. So as the adjustment was made by the thermal power production, hydro share is very relevant on those months. The reservoir levels are recovering. They were very low at the beginning of the year, and nowadays they are in a good in a good position in terms of security of supply. So that is the reason that the price are low in the short-term market.
Yes. What about Edmar? Can you tell us about gas exports? Brazil doesn't have facilities for exporting gas?
No, actually, Brazil is a gas importer, and we have already 5 regasification terminals for operating and 1 being built, and we import gas from Bolivia, and we will be importing gas from Argentina too, because an Argentina company has bought a thermal power plant in the border, in Brazilian side, so they will use Argentina gas to operate this thermal power plant in Uruguaiana. So Brazil has a huge potential for demand increase in natural gas, and also for the domestic production, in the pre-salt area. So we are in a very good moment, because Brazil is now reforming the natural gas industry, liberalizing the natural gas industry to promote competition. So we are in a very good position to promote competition in Brazil from domestic and imported gas. Let's see if this, we just had a new law approval in the lower chamber in Brazil, and for this liberalization. If that works, Brazil will be a very dynamic market for natural gas.
Yes, but I asked this because you're re-injecting gas, and that's an expensive operation. And so you are a natural importer, but opportunities like this, you would have to re-inject the gas, and lose the opportunity to sell it.
Yes, I think that is a very good question. It seems like a paradox why you are re-injecting gas and importing gas. So gas is not the same gas we are talking about. The gas from pre-salt is a gas with oil with associated gas. Companies, they produce oil there, and that's where they make their money. And they have as byproduct natural gas. This gas is a firm gas. You cannot burn it whenever you want. You need to have a firm, stable demand, whereas the thermal power plants in Brazil are complementary to the hydropower plants and the renewables, and they need flexible gas. They cannot use pre-salt gas because they need to be able to variate production. So I see in the future that LNG will have a room in Brazilian natural gas market, and we're gonna have an increase in domestic demand also for firm gas. But this should be for different types of projects. We hope that this liberalization program that we have in Brazil will help to develop these 2 types of markets for natural gas in Brazil. One market for flexible gas and another market for more firm gas, mostly oriented to transportation industry, gas-intensive industry, and some thermal power plants with firm dispatch. So we'll need LNG in the future, in my opinion.
Thank you, Edmar. Final question to Gonzalo and to panelists, and is to do with new projects. Don't you have new projects for renewables, for sun and wind, or you have enough electricity as it is, and there's no new projects to be in place in the near future.
Well, at the moment, we have all that we need. We planified last years ago, and in this moment, we have more demand that we expect, less demand than we expected. So we need to wait a few years until we reinish the installation of more renewables. But the decision is taken in the sense that in the future, when the demand grows, we are going to install more photovoltaics because it's better in this moment because the correlation with the demand, and depends on the demand. All depends on the demand. The manager is the demand. We need to follow the demand, and as I show, the demand have a drop, and we need to wait until the demand is okay. In this moment, we haven't got any project on course, and we apologize in that situation, but it's not possible to install and change the matrix every 5 years. So we change the matrix, we have a renewal matrix, we have a rule, when the demand increase, we are going to install again photovoltaic energy, but the people need to wait until the moment is the good moment to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Gonzalo, Edmar, and Luciano. It's been interesting to hear about you. Just to conclude, what is happening in Latin America regarding the effect of COVID on energy, I can say that that demand has dropped everywhere. Prices haven't dropped everywhere, as I show in Colombia. Renewables are being used much more in Brazil and in Uruguay. We have little renewables in Colombia, so that's not the case. But the recovery of the economy would be an important factor to see more projects in place in the near future, perhaps renewables, but we don't believe that this will be derailed, but COVID, the energy transition that is taking place worldwide. So thank you very much. I turn it over to David, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for this very interesting webinar, and thank you for panelists.
Oh, my. Thank you, Isaac. IAEE wishes to thank you and our outstanding panelists for truly a wonderful webinar. It's one that we could go on and on and on, so we appreciate all of your due diligence and your support with this effort. Just a reminder for everyone, this webinar has been recorded, will be on our website this afternoon for future downloads. Please share that with your friends and colleagues. A reminder as well, we welcome you to join the association by visiting www.iaee.org. Wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and until the next time, a nice IAEE send-off. Thank you so much.